Western Kentucky University, through a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities, presents Kentucky Heritage. The story of crafts and traditions passed on from generation to generation. Of the traditional hand tools, such as the broadaxe, used by the pioneers to hew and shape logs. Of the handmade piecework quilt, a labor of love by young and old. And of the Kentucky Longrifle, a handmade reproduction of a proud gunsmith. Today's story, the Longrifle in revival.
Hello, I'm Ken Clarke. What is the appeal of this reproduction of a famous Kentucky Longrifle? And what has prompted Kentuckians in all walks of life to treasure replicas like this one and to build up elaborate fraternal organizations and ritual around their use? One possible answer is to say that the object itself has appeal. Something about its shape, or mechanism, or function that attracts people to it. There are such factors as proportion, harmony, balance, and symmetry that please our sense of order or arrangement. What we propose to do is to examine this so-called Kentucky Longrifle closely and ask some questions about it. We may not find all the answers. We may raise more questions about the revival than we had before we began. But I've asked Marshall Love to come in and explain the function of the Kentucky Longrifle for me. Marshall, I'm glad you could get here.
Thank you, Dr. Clarke.
Here's the replica. Marshall, I have an interesting gun here. This is an authentic Kentucky Longrifle, brought into Kentucky about the time of Daniel Boone. These are precious and rare now, but the replica, to me, looks very fine. It's a handsome gun. What about the firing mechanism of this? What is this piece that stands up here?
That's called a frizzen.
A frizzen?
A frizzen.
What's its function?
Well, it has, I guess you'd say, two functions. It covers the powder and is a piece of hard steel that will cause a flint to strike and make sparks and light your powder in the pan.
Could I see how the sparks are struck on that?
All right.
It makes a shower of sparks, all right. I notice that the frizzen flies forward when that happens.
Yes, has to get out of the way, and it's pushed out of the way as the flint strikes it and lets the sparks go into the pan.
When you say the flint strikes the steel, really that's the same as the steel and flint in the cigarette lighter, isn't it? That is, there's a little piece of flint in the hammer there, like this, and it strikes steel and makes a spark and sets a fire, really.
Same old principle.
That frizzen, you say, sits down this way over the pan. Will that come forward now?
It'll come forward any time.
And that little pan is full of powder.
You pour
How
your
does the fire
primer.
get in the barrel?
It goes through a touch hole in the side of the barrel.
I can see a little hole there, about as big as a pin.
Mm-hmm.
What about this piece down here on the stock? What's this metal piece?
Call that the patch box. You keep your patching to wrap your ball in when you're loading.
You mean the rifle ball has to have a piece of cloth wrapped around it?
Makes a tight gas seal for better trajectory.
Could we load this gun and see just what happens when you use one of those patches?
Yes, sir.
This is a ramrod.
That's a ramrod. You'll spoil me helping me like that, but I'll let you.
Now that's a little measure, holds about a teaspoonful of powder, doesn't it?
I'd say this particular one is 40 grains, if anyone.
And you poured it right in there like
Poured it
pouring
right-
coffee in a percolator, didn't you?
Right.
It's all loose
Right-
down the
right
barrel.
in there. Just loose, poured right down the barrel.
I noticed you wet that cloth. Does it have to be wet?
Well, you need a lubricant, and sometimes you use bear grease or some similar type of lubricant. This time I'm using just plain old, make it nice, saliva, or some people might say other words.
Now you're pushing that down with a ramrod, cloth and all.
Cloth
clear to
and
the mouth.
all.
I suppose that pushes the powder down into the barrel.
If
on
there's
the
any
thing.
stuck to the edge, why it would push it on down.
Now that gun is loaded and ready to fire, I guess.
It's loaded, but it's not quite ready to fire until I prime the pan.
Now I'd like to see that happen. I can see now why old-timers might have said, keep your powder dry. That's right out in the open, isn't it?
Very important to keep the powder dry.
And I can see what a flash in the pan might be, too, because that will make a flash for us.
It'll make a flash, I believe. It
That's
flashed.
a very dramatic conclusion to a nice demonstration, and the gun is still smoking. Thank you very much,
Thank you, Dr.
Marshal
Clarke.
Love. You've given us a good
All right.
demonstration of
Thank
the
you.
firing mechanism. We have been looking at two things, the rifle itself and the phenomenon of what we are calling revival. That is, popular revival of interest in certain old-time crafts like gunsmithing or quilt piecing. We wonder what kinds of urges or associations provide the motivations for people to go to a lot of trouble to do something the hard way, or to acquire objects that no longer function as effectively as modern ones do. We will take a look at what we mean by doing something the hard way. Here is Dr. L.Y. Lancaster, working at his hobby. Well, hello, Dr. Lancaster. What are you doing today?
Mr. Clarke, I'm cutting the grooves in a new rifle barrel here.
Well, I see the barrel now. It's clamped in this tube, isn't it?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And what does the cutting?
It's a tool here that is called a cutter, and it's embedded in what is called a cutting head. This is the cutting head which has been poured in this barrel. And
You just push it in there and it cuts the groove.
the
Is that
tool
it?
has been inletted at the same angle as the spiral of the groove will be. And when it is shoved forward, you can see that it is traveling in a spiral effect.
I see that rod is turning to cut a spiral
That
groove.
is correct, and that's brought about, that is caused by the twist in this square rod back here.
I'm trying it out myself to
That's
see how it
good.
feels.
That's
This is
fine.
the square rod.
That's right.
And I see that it has a nice spiral twist.
It has a twist in it at the same rate that the spiral in the barrel will have, which is about 1 turn in 48 inches.
And that little cutting blade goes right through on the same pattern. What's
Yes.
all this sloppy stuff?
That's the lubricating grease that I use. It is common lard. There's nothing fancy about it.
Common lard.
Just common lard, and they haven't found anything better, even in modern days.
This is what the old-time gunsmiths used,
Exactly
I
the same
suppose.
thing.
And all this homemade rig, I suppose, is
Very much,
like
very much the same. This is very much the same. Some of them used a wooden worm instead of the spiral rod.
That's what you call this rod, a worm?
That's referred to as the worm. That came, however, from the wooden rod, I suspect.
Well, the whole thing seems very primitive to me, the hog lard and the primitive kind of an apparatus.
It's very primitive, but it's efficient. It produces good results.
Would this be anything similar to the mechanism used by gunsmiths, say, of the Revolutionary War period?
From the pictures that I see, it is almost exactly the same as that used in early America.
But certainly you could do better to just go and buy a already rifled barrel, couldn't you?
Yes, sir, those are available on the market, but I personally prefer one made as it was made in the early days, and it shoots just as well. They're just as accurate when done here.
Do you mean you get pleasure out of rifling your own gun
It's
barrel?
very relaxing. It's quite recreational.
Dr. Lancaster, a retired biology professor, spends many relaxing hours at his rifling rig, and he also enjoys shooting his muzzle loader. But let's imagine an 18th century trapper planning a year-long hunting trip into the wilds of Kentucky. It's obvious that if the hunter carried a large caliber gun, say 80 caliber, one that shoots a rifle ball like this one, it would increase his load tremendously to carry a great many rifle balls that weighed that much. Also, it would require a great deal of powder to propel rifle balls of that size from a gun of that size. The obvious solution to reduce his baggage weight for a long hunt would be to have a rifle that would shoot a rifle ball about this size. The smaller rifle balls would weigh less, the powder to propel them would weigh less, and the gun also would weigh less, and he would have a much more efficient hunting trip. So the solution to his baggage problem would be to get rid of the gun like this one, and this incidentally is an 80 caliber gun of the colonial period, and to get a hard-hitting gun of smaller caliber. He could even say to a gunsmith, "Make me a gun to carry to Kentucky." And that is exactly what happened over a period of time. The Pennsylvania gunsmiths made to order weapons that would produce the desired results with smaller consumption of powder and lead, so that the great Kentucky rifle isn't Kentucky at all in its manufacture, it's Pennsylvania. At the time, there were no gunsmiths in Kentucky or any other kind of smith. But in a sense, it is correct to label these rifles Kentucky rifles because they were made to carry to Kentucky. There's a popular notion that this long barrel gives greater accuracy to the bullet in flight. But for practical purposes, it's more correct to say that the longer barrel gives greater sighting accuracy. If the sights are well out in front and far enough apart, a higher degree of accuracy results. So here we have the end product of purely practical or functional considerations. Another way to try to approach the phenomenon of the long rifle in revival is to compare our example here with the modern military rifle. We will just put these two guns side by side. Some people would say that this modern weapon is ugly. Well, really, it isn't intrinsically either ugly or beautiful. As a weapon or a shooting machine, it is vastly superior to the long rifle. That is, it shoots faster, harder, straighter, with much more uniform and dependable results. And for those who admire machining to close tolerances or find uniform mass production attractive, it may be an attractive result of efficiency. Perhaps the aesthetic response, which would make most people regard this less efficient weapon as more pleasing to the eye, has nothing to do with artistry, but is rather the result of various kinds of connotations and associations surrounding American mythology. All those composites of Daniel Boone, the Redskins in the forest, Deer Slayer, miraculous marksmanship, the Western frontier, and so on. It's hard to evaluate the elements of nostalgia and romanticism that enter into our responses. We can understand this better if we talk to someone who is deeply involved in the revival of the Kentucky long rifle. I recently visited Carman House in his gun shop in Morgantown, Kentucky. And Carman, you've worked a long time on this gun already, and it's obviously far from finished.
Yes, sir. Thus far, I have cut my pattern on my stock, and I've inletted for the barrel here, and I've drilled my ramrod hole here for the ramrod. Now I have just completed my lock mortise, and I'm going to put my gun lock in. From there, I put my triggers on top, and then my brass butt plate and trigger guard. Then I shape the gun down, and from there I put the ornamentation on it and finish it up.
That's lots of handwork. About how many days does it take you to make a gun like this?
Well, on one of my better ones, our more expensive type, I spend anywhere from about 2 weeks to 2.5 weeks. I make a planer model, a hunting rifle, that I usually put about a week on that one.
Even that's a long time.
Yes, sir, it is.
Well, it seems to me that if you just use a few modern power tools here, that you could turn these out much faster and easier.
Well, yes, I could, but when you, of course, it's terribly expensive to begin with, but when you go to using a lot of power tools and a lot of that type of stuff, you get away from the handcrafted part of it, and you get away from the feel and the style that can only be captured by handwork.
Well, is it you who wants the handwork, or is it your customer?
Well, it's generally the customer. Of course, I enjoy building a gun that way. I want to try as well as I can to build a gun like that was made 200 years ago.
I read a few months ago about a special gun that you made for the Kentucky Long Rifle Corps to present to the governor of Kentucky. How long did that gun take you to make?
Well, that particular gun, I think I spent about anywhere from 2.5 to 3 weeks on. I wanted it to be real nice, and we wanted a gun that the governor could use and shoot in matches and also hang over his fireplace.
This, it still seems to me that if you have more demand for these than you can meet handily, that you could hire a couple of helpers and put in some power tools and reduce your unit price quite a bit.
Well, that I probably could. I could turn out a lot more guns, but whether the demand would still be that many, and I still think that I would probably lose a lot of my handcrafted skill that goes into these.
The people really want handcrafted guns.
That's exactly it. They want the gun made by hand. A lot of my parts are made by hand.
I noticed this gun, this finished gun you have here on the bench, and I've been looking at some of the detail, the finish work on it. It's a very pretty gun, and I noticed that the wood has a nice effect. There's the choice of wood, apparently.
Yes, sir, that's curly maple.
And in addition to the fact that it's curly maple with a rather pretty grain, I notice all of this hand carving of design, which is purely non-functional. It doesn't help the gun shoot a bit, and yet it's time-consuming, and I suppose we'd call that artistic detail.
Yes, sir. What this goes back to, at the close of the Revolutionary War, there was a great multitude of gunsmiths around Lancaster that made guns during the war. And in order for the gunsmith to survive, he had to be really good at his skill. And so they started building guns that had beautiful maple, beautiful stocks, beautiful all kinds of work done on them. And that's where we get this today. This is exactly as the old ones were made.
I noticed even here, if we could turn this back, this patch box has kind of a floral engraving in it. Now, is that a copy, a precise copy of an earlier gun, or is that your own design?
Well, this particular box is a copy of an old one. It's a rifle that was made by John Mall, Central Pennsylvania, about 1780.
Now, you research the design and then you copy it faithfully.
Yes, sir.
Do you always do that?
No, I don't. I try to build a gun as if I were a gunsmith of that period and day, which they were very creative. But also, I try to stick to the styles of that day also.
And sometimes you too are creative then.
Yes, sir.
And make your own designs.
Certainly.
Now, what about your customers? Do they sometimes specify certain decorative details they want?
Well, yes, most do have some suggestions, but I try to hold them to a rifle that was made in the old days or one particular style.
The customers interest me too. What about the motives these people have for owning these? What seems to be the reason that they'll pay you a pretty good price to make a gun for them?
Well, the old rifles now are quite hard to get and quite expensive, and they want a gun that looks as much like the old ones as possible. Now, some people buy them for that reason. Other people buy them because we have several hunting areas here in Kentucky, and hunting game with a muzzleloader is becoming quite popular. And then there's another one that just like to have a historical piece and carry it to the various shoots and what have you.
What you're saying suggests to me that there are maybe three different motives. I suppose some of them kind of intertwined. You have the person who likes the beautiful object and he wants to admire it for itself. And then you've got the person who hunts and wants the challenge of shooting game or shooting at targets with this historic replica. And then you've got people who apparently who like pageantry or fellowship or group activity, kind of an acting out of part of American history. All these things.
That's exactly right. Our Corps of Lone Riflemen, we sponsor 2 rendezvous per year, and at these rendezvous, you're not supposed to wear any modern clothes or have any of the modern conveniences. You dress like the pioneer would have dressed before 1835. That goes along with buckskins, tomahawks, knives, rifles, and we really have a good time.
And this is competition shooting?
Yes, competition shooting. We all put a prize on the individual match, and whoever wins picks up the prize.
Are there organizations like this Kentucky Long Rifle Corps in other states?
Well, not to my knowledge. We're the only one that have a corps, but there are various other clubs and other teams in other states. We have shot against a number of these teams.
So you would say that there is a revival, wouldn't you? A genuine revival of the interest in and use of the flintlock rifle.
Yes, sir, I definitely would. There's quite a large number of people that are turning to muzzleloaders, and also my demand for building them, I have more than I can do.
I suppose some other people in other states also make muzzleloaders then.
Yes, sir, and a lot of people, of course, that are in this thing build their own rifles too, which is nice.
Can you personally shoot squirrels with this gun?
Yes, sir, I have, with the rifle that I own, killed higher than 500 squirrels with a flintlock, 32 caliber.
You personally have killed 500 or more squirrels?
Yes, sir, at least 500.
So it can be done, even by the modern sharpshooter.
Certainly
well, you've
can.
been busy on this gun, and I'd like to watch you work on it some more to
Yes,
see
sir.
how you do it.
Well, as far as I've got it now, I've got it to the stage where that I take the rasp and cut it on down, and then this is one of the hardest part, and then I put my ornamentation on and stain it with an old type stain.
Perhaps we have raised more questions than we have answered, but we can make a few distinctions now. First, there are 2 distinct roles that the Kentucky rifle has played. One is in its pioneer setting, and the other is in its modern revival of its manufacture and use. In the historical setting, the gun was perhaps the most important possession of its owner, for it frequently put food on the table or repelled unfriendly animals or humans. Judging by the organized activity of some devotees of the Kentucky Long Rifle, it would appear that romantic association does provide some of the motivation. That isn't unusual. There are communities all over America which have annual festivals, pioneer days, and so on. This is pageantry. Acting out a part of the American myth is common. But it isn't merely pageantry. What are people groping for when they go out of their way to associate themselves with certain objects and activities of the past? Dr. Lancaster rejected modern tools, yet he is thoroughly at home in the modern scientific world. When the Rifle Corps meets, he is there to bang away with his flashing, smoking relic of a bygone era. Carman House is also educated and up to date, yet he is going through the motions used by gunsmiths of Pennsylvania from the period before the Revolutionary War. This seems to be a part of a more general movement that we are calling revival. Marshall Love is a modern businessman during working hours, but in his spare time, he enjoys his buckskin outfit and his long rifle. We wonder if some aspects of revival might spring from the feeling that modern man is trapped or specialized in his technology, hence the traditional task out of a simpler culture, building an object that is functional and satisfying with rich association. For some people who have the ability and a creative urge, such activity is good medicine. And what about the things they make? If they can't go all the way and make the objects, they can own them. And with the ownership comes association with a rich legacy of artistic and legendary qualities. The Kentucky rifle is a symbol of honest, exacting craftsmanship. It is a symbol of the daring resourcefulness of pioneer forefathers. And it is an attractive object to handle or hang up as a decoration. We can't separate its aesthetic appeal from all those connotations, and we don't need to. We can speculate, however, that in our age of rapid technological change, some people feel a need to reach back, to rediscover continuity in their culture, to keep their balance in the present through reminders of the past.
This program was produced by Western Kentucky University through a grant supplied by the National Endowment for the Humanities.